Technology has had a tremendous effect on distance education, especially through use of the internet. Distance education has been transformed, mainly because communication has been made so much easier for students. They can now quickly and efficiently contact their tutor and other students, and can access course materials and library resources with a few clicks of a mouse. David Stewart, how has distance education changed under the influence of technology?
The media in which we began providing services to students in the UK Open University was almost all of it by postal system with occasional telephone calls. And today, of course, the medium has changed entirely. Postal communication is the least frequent medium which a student will use. We receive 36,000 email messages from students every month, and we receive 2.5 million telephone calls every year. So that will give you some idea of the changes that have occurred. And a considerable percentage of our students now will carry out all their general activities online, even to registration and to paying fees. And of course, in terms of advice also, because if you want advice at 2 o'clock in the morning, the web is available. I'm afraid that if you want advice at 2 o'clock in the morning, our staff are not available. They have to sleep.
Technology is an irritant almost in the process. Yes, you have to know all about technology, and yes, it needs to be carefully thought out as a component. But in reality, the main issue in distance education, as far as I'm concerned, is access. And maybe the second issue is community. One of the things that I'm finding, I have a very relatively high-tech program, and it's entirely online, and it's entirely by what Tony Bates would call e-learning. But there's very clear that even in that environment, just like it was in the print-based environment that I used to be in Athabasca, students are isolated. They simply don't feel like a typical member of a university community would feel if they were in a face-to-face environment, and that's just reality.
The balance between technology and appropriate text-based designed material is a very, very important one for us to hold on to. Critical for South Africa is access, because the needs of the society and sensitivity to those needs requires of a university like ours to try to seek more open, accessible ways of higher education learning and training to take place. And therefore, we realize that technology, large numbers of our potential students and other learners is not available to them in terms of accessible in terms of the home. And yet many of our students work in their workplaces. They have access to technology in the workplace, but they don't have access to technology at home, which is a very, very important, I think, learning medium, learning tool, if technology is universally accessible.
我觉得现在主张要把所有这各种学习模式，包括现在谈的比较多的教师为中心的，它也没有什么罪过，本身是一种教学方式，它非常有效。但是学生为中心有它自己的优势，所以我刚才说这些不同的学习模式和教学的方式要 blending， 要混合起来，各自发挥自己的专长，用得恰到好处。那么第三个 I 我说的就是现在我们讲的比较多，叫 integrating， 就是要把刚才说的这两个，一个是技术的融合，一个是教学方式的 pedagogy 的这个教育学方的这种教育学的模式，这两者还要整合起来，而且要和我刚才说的那个 curriculum， 就是各个学科的内容有机的整合起来。所以实际上是要把 technology, pedagogy and curriculum 课程内容通通的 integrating 都来整合在一起。当然在这样做的时候是难度很大的，因为它主要的不是个理论问题，而是个 practical issues， 它是个实践问题。 需要在第一线教学校里头，在远程教育的院校里头的第一线的老师和学生们去创造、去探索，最后才能一个一个学科的解决。这最后不是由理论家来解决，而是由实践者来解决。
I am optimistic. I think technology has a terribly important role to play. But we need to define that role very, very carefully. And we also need to tell ourselves that we are not going to see a situation where access to and the ability to use technologies is going to be available with a big bang. It's going to be evolutionary in terms of its progress. Institutions should begin to look at technologies to help support the administration, their cost development, and to a certain extent perhaps production and delivery. But to demand that you need to have technology also to be a learner, I would be a little bit cautious, because in at least in the environments that I've worked in, the access to connectivity, the cost of connectivity, and the personal cost of learning using technologies is something that many cannot afford.
I think a great advantage of the online medium is the fact that it can network people, and it can network ideas, network issues that we can discuss interculturally, cross-culturally, etc. So I have really been interested in looking at how do people come together in an online environment, share each other's experiences, and construct new meaning and knowledge.
So I spend a lot of my time reassuring people about the digital divide, basically saying things are moving quite fast in terms of access to technology, and actually you're not all that far behind the richer countries when it comes to using those things intelligently in the classroom. I mean, it's a lovely example. Everyone's still going around saying, because Nelson Mandela said it a few years ago, that half the world's population never made a telephone call, and there are more telephones in Tokyo than the whole of Africa. It's not true anymore. The number of telephones in Africa has doubled in the last few years. I was in South Africa last week, and they're all walking around with cell phones. So you've got to watch these.
First of all, a very clear vision of where the institution should go and where you want to take it. And then to look at where does the technology fit into that vision? Can it facilitate or hinder the way we want to go? And the next thing to do is to bring that process of deciding on a vision and how to get there. You have to bring in other people besides yourself, and amongst that you might bring in your head of IT as well as your head of academic departments, and get them to talk these issues through so that they're informing each other and they're learning from each other. So I see it more as a process of putting in place a process that's ongoing, rather than suddenly waking up one day and say we've got to make some decisions about technology. I think the technology does change the game as the technology changes.